But when it comes to borderline personality disorder, it's constantly changing.
In my head.
You always do this to me. You are such a jerk. Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get so angry. I didn't know what I was doing. This is an example of borderline personality disorder, BPD, and black and white thinking. Before I get into borderline personality disorder, let me quickly go over what black and white thinking is. So black and white thinking is seeing things in extremes. It's what it sounds like, black and white, and you don't see the gray in between. So usually you see things as all good or all bad. You're all good or you're all bad. I'm all good or I'm all bad. The situation that we're in is all good or all bad, and there's never that in between. So it's always these extremes that you're seeing. Now, from what developmental psychology has taught us, and the theory kind of is out there, that when you are growing up, you develop the capacity to be able to see things outside of black and white, because we all as children see things as black and white. We all see good or bad. We don't just naturally see in between. And so as we develop, we start to develop the brain capacity to be able to do this, to be able to see, like, well, there's parts of people that are good and there's parts of people that are bad, and there's parts of the situation that are good and there's parts of the situation that are bad. But if we suffer some kind of attachment trauma in childhood, as somebody with BPD might, they've tried to rename the disorder emotional dysregulation disorder specifically for this reason, because it seems like when a caregiver doesn't appropriately care for you, doesn't attune to your needs and attune to your emotions, then you may suffer some kind of trauma as a result of that. And when you experience this trauma, trying to see things outside of black and white can be very painful, because you have this strong emotion that comes up when you think of yourself or your parent or your caregiver as a child in a positive or a negative way, and when you try to see the in-between, you just can't do it, because when that emotional system is activated, that fear system, it shuts down. It lessens your capacity to be able to use your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that does this thinking. And so the theory goes that if you don't have the emotional regulation skills to be able to calm that emotion down, then you're not going to be able to figure out that things have more than just black and white to them, that they're not all good, they're not all bad, and you can have situations where there's a little gray, where somebody such as yourself may have some positive qualities and you may have some negative qualities. You're not just good or bad. Now, when we look at borderline personality disorder, we're looking at particular personality traits that characterize this disorder. So things like anxiousness, depressivity, impulsivity, hostility, emotional lability, risk-taking, and separation insecurity. And just from what I've said already, you can probably see how some of those might apply from trauma that you've experienced in childhood. Now, this of course doesn't mean that you've experienced trauma in childhood. You may also have some kind of genetic disposition for this, so I don't want to make it feel like if you have borderline personality disorder, that's the reason why it's happening. But what we see with black and white thinking, I mentioned anxiousness and depressivity. So you see this black and white between being anxious and feeling guilty about things and feeling depressed about things, and then projecting them outwards in hostility, and then feeling separation insecurity when people pull away. And that's kind of what characterizes this disorder, is this pull and push and pull and push, and never really being certain of, am I all good, am I all bad, are they all good, or are they all bad? And there's a constant flipping, in contrast to what we talked about in yesterday's video with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, where they typically see things much more static. They see themselves as all good and other people as all bad for the majority of the time. Every now and then it'll switch. They'll see themselves for very brief periods as all bad. But when it comes to borderline personality disorder, it's constantly changing. And it's constantly changing with borderline personality disorder because that strong emotion comes up, and when you lack the regulation skills to be able to regulate it, your brain can't think. You start to see things in black and white, and then you're trying to make sense of what's going on. So you say, okay, well, I feel attacked by them, so they must be all bad. And then you try to retaliate, to try to act out the way that somebody would act out if they were being attacked. You retaliate, you're hostile, and then the person gets defensive, and then you start to question, wait a minute, did I do the wrong thing? So then you think, oh, I'm bad, and they're good, and then you start to feel depressed, and you apologize, and you feel separation insecurity because they're moving away from you, and you don't want that. You want a relationship with this person, and it gets very confusing because all of this can happen flipping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth within a very short time period. You could have a conversation with somebody with borderline personality disorder, and in 10 minutes they've gone back and forth 10 times. Now, I know this because I believe I had borderline personality disorder. I was never diagnosed, but I used to do this exact same thing. I would evaluate people, and I'd evaluate myself, and I'd constantly be unsure of who was the one that was wrong in this situation, who was the one that was right. Is this a person that I can trust? Can I even trust myself? And it's very very confusing. It's that black and white thinking, and it's driven by an emotion that we don't know how to regulate it. So sometimes we get caught up in trying to think about it and change the way that we think about things, but it's not the thoughts that are the problem necessarily, although they can be a component of regulating the emotions. It's really the emotions that are the driver here. So if you're somebody who has borderline personality disorder, or maybe you're just experiencing some of these traits because you've been through some trauma recently and you're a little dysregulated, I recommend to go in and see a trauma specialist, a therapist who understands borderline personality disorder, who understands personality disorders in general, who understands trauma, because they don't all understand that. And they should be able to validate your emotions and help you explore your emotions and understand what they mean. And they'll be able to give you a framework to be able to relate to your thoughts and your emotions so that they make more sense. They're much more consistent. And once you get them consistent, you can start to see that things are not always so black and white. And you have good qualities and you have bad qualities. And other people have good qualities and other people have bad qualities. And situations are good and situations are bad. But there's a gray area for all of that. And having that capacity to see that gives you so much more ease in your life, because you no longer have to fight against things that are bad, and you no longer have to prove that you're good. You can just see that things are the way that they are and respond to them accordingly with a lot more wiggle room. There is a book that I recommend if you really want to learn about this on your own, although I strongly encourage you to go in to see a therapist, but the Dialectical Behavior Therapy Workbook, I have it in my favorites. I'll put that link below. What that book does is really give you the skills that maybe you didn't learn in childhood. Maybe your parents didn't even have the skills themselves to teach you. So it teaches you slowly how to be able to regulate those emotions the way that a therapist would, and you can work on it at home. If you want to learn more about your own mental health, head on over to youtube.com/RyanLiberty, hit subscribe and hit the bell after you hit subscribe to get notified of all my videos. I cannot say thank you enough to my patrons for supporting me in doing these videos. They make these videos possible. If you want to support me on my mission of humanizing mental health, head on over to Patreon. The link will be below. Now let's hear from you. If you have borderline personality disorder, if you have some of these traits maybe, if you just recognize this black and white thinking in yourself, you don't have to have BPD. What has helped you to get out of this? What has helped you to not feel so emotionally charged about it and to be able to see the shades of gray in between the black and white? We need your tips. Our community needs to hear from each other to learn. Let's leave those down below. Thank you as always for joining me out here, and I'll see you around next time, everyone.